I think this is the best value flat bar mixed terrain bike under $1,500. Plus, this bike has several unique features I've never seen on a stock bike before. We're talking about the Spot Acme, an aluminum flat bar all-terrain bike that is in a category all its own. All right, question. Have you ever wondered if there's a bike that serves many purposes, has good value, and is virtually maintenance-free? Well, you're in luck. So today we're gonna talk about where this bike thrives, all of its very unique features, and where I think this bike could improve. Which reminds me, this video is not sponsored by Spot. In fact, all my opinions are my own. This bike is truly unique and has a lot of interesting details. So let's just start with the basics. This bike is from a Colorado-based brand called Spot that has deep roots in the single-speed mountain bike culture. Dirt rag, anyone? This thing is fascinating. It's an aluminum frame with a carbon fork and flat bars.
Scott.
SRAM, hydraulic disc brakes.
They're level.
Mountain bike grade. I put this in the category of genre blender. It's got one wheel in gravel and the other's in commuting. Is it down gravel? Is it commute trail? This bike was brought to my attention from EBD channel legend Alex. And ever since I saw this thing, I knew we had to talk about it on the channel. It's like an off-road bike designed for cyclists, disguised as a commuter bike. For example, it's an 11-speed, but here's the hook. There's no derailleur.
And sure, this thing doesn't have 12 and 13 speeds. It has 11, which is plenty. And it more than makes up for it with all the other interesting things that it does.
It runs a Shimano Elfine internally geared hub. And the reason for that is it has a Gates belt drivetrain. And I'll tell you why that's significant in just a moment. If you like weird bikes, good vibes, and other positive things, consider subscribing. In fact, we're running a special, 100% off for the rest of the month. Every bike has maintenance, but any bike that's able to keep its performance while reducing the amount of maintenance needed is a net win in my book, which is exactly what a belt drive does. It's not gonna rust, you don't have to oil it all the time, and it will last up to 5 times longer than a traditional chain. For commuting, it is the superior choice, especially for that dumb friend that never does anything to their bike. Tires are always flat, there's always something squeaking.
Yeah, you, Gary.
Ugh. Like everything, there is give and take to this system. Removing the rear wheel is not necessarily harder, it's just learning a new way of doing it. Plus, these things don't like shifting under load.
It just takes a little bit of getting used to. You have to kind of lighten up on the pedals or stop pedaling for it to shift into gear. You get used to it, but it's a little funny at first.
Which again is not the biggest deal. It just takes a minute to relearn how to ride the bike in its way. When you're through changing, you're through. So how does this bike ride? Simply put, it's fun. And there's 2 main ways that I've interacted with the ride on this bike. The first is clipped in as a trail ripper. The flat bars make it playful, fun to ride, but there is one thing I should mention. If you're gonna do a lot of off-road, I highly suggest ditching the stock 32s with tubes for some tubeless 38s, maybe 40s, depending on how frisky you feel. Full transparency, I could find no information to tell me if these wheels are actually tubeless compatible. So I just went ahead and did it, and so far so good. But you've been warned. Plus, it just looks better with the fatter tires. Look at those chubby hubbies. Yeah, I almost forgot. The other version is with flat pedals. Super commuter. Any outfit, anywhere, anytime. Plus, this thing does have mounts for fenders, so it's all season ready, although you're probably gonna have to drop the tires back down to 32s. It's all give and take. I like to think of this as the deal maker. I honestly couldn't believe that this came stock on this bike. It's something that will absolutely make life easier and technically could help save our lives. And that's this Dynamo hub, which not only powers this light, it also powers a rear light without a battery. which means every single time you ride this bike, you'll have lights on the front and the back. They're bolted to the bike and they're always on when the wheel's turning. Awesome. I could use that on pretty much every bike.
The frame is actually designed to run the generator hub.
And I'll show you how I ultimately will integrate this bike into my life in just a minute.
The stock flat bars on this bike are such an interesting choice. It makes it instantly approachable for commuting and infinitely playful for off-road.
The overall quality of this bike is high. The attention to detail is kind of next level. For example, they Loctite the bottle cage bolts. I've never seen anyone do that before. This is another really cool small detail about this bike. It comes with a small tube of paint for painting little like dings and nicks that you get on the bike. That's unheard of. Respect. Just that little extra effort. Woo! And this logo is reflective. That's cool. Okay, so what do I think the ultimate use case on this bike is? Well, first I've got to go over a couple things that I think they could improve on. The biggest thing for me is the rims should be a little more off-road capable. These are definitely skinny rims. Internal of 17 millimeters. Considering 25 is the standard I use these days, this is skinny. And the small block 8s, I think they're a little small and a little fragile for my taste.
Oh no. Well, as you may have guessed, this thing comes stock with traditional tubes, and I didn't bring a patch kit. That's on me. Does anyone remember when these were considered big tires? Look at those adorable things. This thing comes stock with Kenda 700 by 32 tires. They're actually small block 8. Shout out 2005. And this definitely begs the question, can these be set up tubeless? So one thing to note about this bike that's different than any other is if you do get a flat on the back, you're going to need a 15 to take off the rear wheel, which nobody carries those unless you ride a track bike. But once you know that, then you know to carry it. So the more you know, I don't know what.
And the other thing would be a little more room for clearance. What about room for 45s with fenders? But that's just me. What about you? What would you change? Even with those small gripes, I think that this bike is a tremendous value. As of this moment, it retails for under $1,500. With all of these unique features, I think that is absolutely worth it. And how I'll utilize this bike in my life, as the great Josh Becker calls it,
shredding on the way to work. It's the shred muter.
Think of it like a 4Runner. You're gonna get groceries with it, but it's gonna look badass when you do it. Plus, it will have some off-road capabilities, if one is so declined. Okay, how I personally set this rig up, I set it up tubeless with some Fillmore valves, which do great against clogging. Hutchinson Override 700 by 38s. Set up tubeless for the ground control, and boy does it make a difference. I added a rack from Old Man Mountain. Easy to set up, and it looks great.
I'm proud of that one. Tying the room together.
And some Expedo wet red flat pedals. Style, function. It gives you just like, you know, utilitarian vibe. And then I added a little flair. Because what's a stock bike without a little personality? Okay, now I'm curious what you would add to this bike. What am I missing? Maybe a bell?
Okay, set up at the Old Man Mountain rack, fully built up, Expedo flat pedals, multi-tool with a bottle cage. This thing weighs in at 29.8 pounds or 13.19 kilograms.
If you're someone that does light to medium gravel rides on the weekend, but has a constant commute throughout the week, this bike is a pretty solid option. Cold shoulder. Belt drive, minimum maintenance, Dynamo hub, hydro disc brakes. I gotta say, I am impressed. Especially for that price point. Under 2K, it's, dude, this thing. Woo!
Now, since this bike is mostly going to be used for commuting, we'll have to go over the proper ways to lock it. And to learn how to do that, you'll have to watch this video, where I go over all the do's and don'ts to make sure that we can keep our rigs and all the parts on them safe in the city. 'Cause they're vultures, ruthless out there. I'm telling you, no respect.